A wave of stunned gasps swept through the Romulan classroom as Professor Pyrrhus displayed images of the predatory Earth creatures humans brazenly took as pets, from snarling wolves to roaring lions. 30 young Romulan faces turned pale green, some students trembling visibly, as their 7-foot-tall reptilian professor explained the disturbing bond between humans and deadly fanged beasts. Pyrrhus clicked to the next slide, bringing up a huge furry earth mammal called a bear. Gleaming 6-inch claws extended from its meaty paws. Pyrrhus slammed a fist on the lectern. You may think me mad, but the humans trap these in their dwellings as casual companions. They name them, stroke their fur, allow them near young Romulans. What sort of species cohabitates with fanged predators? One boy, Tarek, tentatively raised a shaking hand. Professor, why don't the beasts maul their human owners? Pyrrhus displayed gory scenes from human movies and video games, sending shockwaves through his class. Students squirmed and whimpered. One girl fled the room, retching. So yes, humans willingly share homes with large carnivorous mammals, Pyrrhus growled, and this makes humans highly dangerous to us. Yesterday, the Romulan Star Empire received a disturbing message from human leaders. They demand we cede 3 key border star systems, or FACE, and I quote, "consequences never before witnessed in galactic history." The humans have amassed warships on our frontier. The Star Empire believes if we do not find a way to stop them, they will conquer us, destroy our way of life, and perhaps even feed us to their giant pet predators as a cruel joke. We Romulans must unite against this threat, even if it means great sacrifice. The alternative is to become meek human thralls, trembling under their blood-stained boots and bear paws for eternity. The students looked at each other uneasily, now realizing they were on the cusp of a vast interstellar war with a fearsome, mysterious enemy. An enemy that treated 600-pound carnivores like cuddly puppies. Pyrrhus continued his lecture, his voice growing more ominous. He activated a holographic display in the center of the classroom. Observe, students, the so-called pets that humans keep in their dwellings. An image of a large muscular canine materialized, its sharp teeth bared in a snarl. The students gasped, some recoiling in their seats. This beast is known as a Rottweiler, Pyrrhus explained, a breed of dog originally used for herding livestock and guarding property. But in the hands of humans, they become weapons. The hologram shifted, replaced by a massive, furry creature standing on its hind legs. It had long, curved claws and a gaping mouth filled with gleaming fangs. Several students screamed. And this monstrosity is a bear, Pyrrhus said grimly, found in the wild on Earth, but sometimes captured and kept as pets by particularly deranged humans. Zoran, a pale-faced student in the front row, raised a trembling hand. Professor, how do the humans control such vicious creatures without being torn apart? Pyrrhus shook his head. Through a long history of domestication and training, but even then the process is imperfect. The animal's wild instincts can surface at any moment, with deadly consequences. Kyle Walker, age 35, was found dead in his living room, his body ravaged by his pet lion, Pyrrhus read aloud. Authorities say Walker had raised the lion from a cub and considered it a member of the family, that is, until it ripped out his throat. The students sat in stunned silence, trying to process the madness of keeping apex predators as companions. But incidents like these are just the beginning, Pyrrhus said ominously. Humans also exploit dangerous beasts for entertainment, forcing them to perform degrading tricks in front of cheering crowds. The hologram now showed a tiger jumping through a flaming hoop, a whip-wielding human trainer in the background. The students looked at each other uneasily, bracing for even more unsettling revelations about the depths of human depravity. Pyrrhus dimmed the lights in the classroom, casting an eerie glow over the students' faces as he brought up the next holographic display. Now let us delve into the twisted world of human circuses, he said, his voice low and ominous. An image materialized in the center of the room, depicting a large circular arena, surrounded by towering stands filled with human spectators. In the middle of the arena stood a lone figure, a human male with a whip in one hand and a chair in the other. The students leaned forward, their eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "This human is known as Marcus," Pyrrhus explained. "He is what they call an animal trainer, someone who teaches wild beasts to perform unnatural acts for the amusement of others." As if on cue, 3 massive tigers emerged from the shadows, their fangs bared and eyes gleaming in the dim light. They circled Marcus, snarling and snapping their jaws. The students gasped, some gripping the edges of their seats. Marcus cracked his whip, the sharp sound echoing through the arena. The tigers flinched but continued to pace around him, their muscles rippling beneath their striped fur. He held the chair out in front of him, using it as a flimsy barrier between himself and the predators. "Watch closely," Pyrrhus instructed. "See how the tigers appear to obey his commands, jumping through hoops and standing on their hind legs at his signal." The students watched in a mix of awe and horror as Marcus put the tigers through their paces. The animals performed their tricks with an unsettling combination of grace and ferocity, always seeming on the verge of turning on their master at any moment. "But make no mistake," Pyrrhus warned. "There is always an underlying tension, a constant potential for danger. These beasts are not truly tamed, merely suppressed by fear and force." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then, with a grim expression, he brought up another image. It showed a mangled human corpse, barely recognizable beneath the blood and torn flesh. This was Wolfgang Schuler, a famous circus performer, who met his end at the claws and fangs of his own trained bears. During a live show in front of thousands of spectators, his animals turned on him, ripping him apart in a frenzy of primal rage. Several students turned away from the gruesome sight, their faces pale and eyes wide with shock. Some covered their mouths, fighting the urge to be sick. Pyrrhus let the image linger for a moment before continuing. "Despite incidents like these, humans continue to work with dangerous predators for the sake of entertainment. It seems to be ingrained in their nature, a result of their peculiar evolutionary path that has molded them into reckless thrill-seekers." He leaned forward, his reptilian eyes glinting in the dim light. "But as disturbing as this may be, it is only the beginning. The true depths of human depravity go far beyond mere circus acts." The students shifted uneasily in their seats, their hearts pounding with a growing sense of dread. They had thought the tales of humans living with predators were unsettling enough, but now they realized that was just the surface of a much darker abyss. Pyrrhus tapped a button on his lectern, bringing up a new image that filled the students with a fresh wave of horror and revulsion. Their eyes widened in disbelief at the sight before them, scarcely able to comprehend the twisted scene. Pyrrhus tapped another button, and the holographic display shifted to a dimly lit underground arena. The students squinted, trying to make out the details of the grainy, low-quality video. Suddenly, the sound of barking and snarling filled the classroom, causing several students to flinch. "What you are about to witness," Pyrrhus said grimly, "is a prime example of the depths of human cruelty and depravity." As the video came into focus, the students saw 2 pit bulls, their muscular bodies covered in scars and fresh wounds, circling each other in a blood-stained pit. A crowd of humans surrounded the arena, their faces twisted with a mix of excitement and bloodlust as they shouted and cheered. "This, students, is the dark world of underground animal fighting," Pyrrhus explained. "Humans breed and train these dogs for the sole purpose of fighting each other to the death, while spectators place bets on the outcome." The pit bulls lunged at each other, their powerful jaws snapping and tearing at flesh. The students watched in horror as the dogs ripped into each other, their yelps and growls echoing through the classroom. Zara, a petite female student, covered her mouth, her eyes wide with revulsion. "How can they do this?" she whispered. "How can they force these animals to fight like this?" Pyrrhus shook his head. Greed and a twisted sense of entertainment. Human society may claim to abhor such practices, but the underground fighting rings continue to thrive, fueled by criminal organizations and the promise of large profits. As the video ended, The students sat in stunned silence, trying to process the brutality they had just witnessed. Pyrrhus brought up another image, this time of a human male with cold, calculating eyes and a cruel smile. "This is Victor Popov," Pyrrhus said, "a notorious dogfight organizer who built a criminal empire on the suffering of animals. But even he was not immune to the violence he perpetuated." The next image showed Popov's lifeless body, his throat slashed and his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Popov was found murdered in his home, likely by a rival gang seeking to take over his territory, Pyrrhus explained. The students shifted uneasily in their seats, the weight of the lecture's revelations pressing down on them. They had thought the tales of humans living with predators were disturbing enough, but now they realized that was only the beginning. Pyrrhus leaned forward, his reptilian eyes glinting with a mixture of disgust and fascination. And yet even this is not the final piece of the puzzle. There is one last aspect of human-animal relationships that I have yet to share with you, one that will shake you to your very core. Pyrrhus tapped a button on his lectern, and the holographic display went dark. The classroom was plunged into an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of the students' shallow breathing. They waited, their minds racing with the possible horrors that lurked just beyond the veil of their understanding. Suddenly the hologram flickered to life once more, casting a sickly green glow over the students' faces. They leaned forward, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, as the image began to take shape before them. As the holographic image took shape, revealing the smiling face of a middle-aged human male, Pyrrhus began to speak in a low, somber tone. "This, students, is the tragic story of Dr. Alexander Novak, a renowned veterinarian who dedicated his life to the care and treatment of exotic animals." The students leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the hologram as it shifted to show Dr. Novak kneeling beside a massive Bengal tiger, his hand resting gently on the animal's head. Dr. Novak was known for his exceptional bond with his patients, particularly Raja, a tiger he had raised from a cub, Pyrrhus continued, his voice tinged with a mix of fascination and unease. The hologram flickered, revealing a series of images depicting Dr. Novak and Raja together, playing, training, and even sharing affectionate moments. The students watched, transfixed, as the bond between the human and the tiger seemed to deepen with each passing image. Suddenly the hologram shifted to a dark, unsettling scene. The students gasped as they saw the interior of a dimly lit living room, with overturned furniture and shattered glass littering the floor. In the center of the room lay the mangled body of Dr. Novak, his once white lab coat now stained a deep crimson. "One fateful evening," Pyrrhus said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Dr. Novak's wife Elena returned home to find her husband's lifeless body, torn and bloody, with Raja sitting nearby, his fur matted with the evidence of his horrific act." The students stared in horror at the gruesome scene, their minds reeling with the implications of what they were witnessing. Pyrrhus allowed the image to linger for a moment, before continuing, his expression grim. The students shifted uneasily in their seats, their faces pale with a mix of revulsion and fear. They had thought the tales of humans living with predators were unsettling enough, but this final revelation had shaken them to their core. Pyrrhus slowly paced in front of the holographic display, his reptilian eyes scanning the faces of his students. "It is essential to remember," he said, his voice low and intense, "that even the most domesticated creatures retain their wild instincts and can pose a serious threat if not handled with extreme caution." As the lecture drew to a close, the students began to file out of the classroom, their minds buzzing with the day's disturbing revelations. Hushed conversations filled the hallways as they grappled with the unsettling truths they had learned about the complex and often dangerous nature of human-animal relationships. Pyrrhus remained in the empty classroom, his gaze fixed on the now dark holographic display. He couldn't help but wonder what other dark secrets of human culture lay waiting to be uncovered, lurking just beneath the surface of their seemingly civilized facade. As the students filed out of the classroom, a palpable unease hung in the air. The lecture had left them shaken, their minds reeling with the disturbing revelations about the dark side of human-animal relationships. Karek, a tall, lanky male student with a pensive expression, lingered behind, his gaze fixed on Primus. Approaching the professor hesitantly, Karek cleared his throat. "Professor Primus," he began, his voice low and uncertain, "I was wondering, have there ever been instances of humans deliberately using their pets as weapons against other humans?" Primus paused, his reptilian eyes narrowing as he considered the question. After a moment of heavy silence, he nodded slowly. "Yes, Karek," he replied, his voice tinged with a mix of reluctance and fascination. "There have been rare but deeply troubling cases of just that." The professor leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Take, for example, the story of Marcus Holloway, a human with a long history of criminal behavior. Holloway trained his 2 large Rottweilers to attack on command, transforming them into living weapons." Karek's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat as Primus continued. During a particularly brutal home invasion, Holloway unleashed his dogs on an unsuspecting family. The victims suffered severe injuries and deep psychological trauma, their lives forever changed by the actions of a man and his maliciously trained pets. Primus shook his head, his expression grim. The police later discovered that Holloway had a pattern of using his dogs to intimidate and assault those who crossed him or owed him money. It was a chilling example of how humans can exploit the power and aggression of animals for their own twisted purposes. Primus placed a hand on Karek's shoulder, his touch cold and leathery. "It is indeed difficult to comprehend," he agreed, "but it is important that we understand the darker aspects of human nature, no matter how unsettling they may be." As Karek left the classroom, Primus couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over him. He knew that there were likely many more disturbing facets of human-animal relationships waiting to be uncovered, and he felt a morbid curiosity, a need to delve deeper into the subject. Making a mental note to continue his research, Primus gathered his materials and prepared to leave the classroom. The revelations of the day weighed heavily on his mind, and he knew that his journey into the darker aspects of human nature was far from over. A sharp rap at the door jolted Primus from his reverie. He glanced at the clock, surprised to see how late it was. Who could be visiting at this hour? With a sense of foreboding, he opened the door to find Zorak standing there, his eyes wide and haunted. "Professor," Zorak stammered, his voice trembling, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I had to talk to someone." Primus ushered him inside, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's troubling you, Zorak?" The young Romulan sank into a chair, his hands shaking as he clasped them together. "Ever since your lecture, I've been having these nightmares, horrible, vivid visions of humans and their pets." Primus leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Tell me more." Zorak swallowed hard, his gaze distant as he recounted the dream. "I was trapped in this dark, winding house, and there were these dogs. Their eyes glowed red, and they were stalking me, snarling and snapping at my heels. I tried to escape, but everywhere I turned there were more of them. And then I found this room." Zorak's voice dropped to a whisper. "It was filled with cages, and inside were all these animals, tigers, lions, bears, but they were all so thin and covered in scars." Primus felt a chill run down his spine as Zorak continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. And in the middle of the room there was this figure, a human male, tall and shadowy, with this cruel smile on his face. He started laughing, this maniacal laugh, and he began opening the cages one by one. Zorak's breath came in short, sharp gasps as he relived the horror of the dream. "The animals, they came towards me, snarling and hissing, and the human, he pointed at me and commanded them to attack. I could feel their hot breath on my skin, their claws tearing at my flesh, and then I woke up screaming." Primus sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had expected his lecture to have an impact on the students, but this was something else entirely. "Zorak," he said gently, placing a hand on the young Romulan's shoulder, What you're experiencing is a perfectly normal response to the disturbing information you learned today. Nightmares are the mind's way of processing and coping with traumatic or unsettling concepts. Zorak looked up at him, his eyes pleading. But why did it feel so real? Like it wasn't just a dream, but a warning or a premonition of something to come. Primus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes our subconscious can take the things we learn and twist them into something more sinister, more prophetic. But I assure you, Zorak, these are just dreams. They can't hurt you. Zorak nodded slowly, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. Thank you, Professor. I think I just needed to hear that from someone else. As Zorak left, Primus couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the nightmares than simple psychological processing. He had seen the raw, primal fear in Zorak's eyes, the way his hands had trembled as he recounted the dream. No, there was something deeper at work here, something that went beyond the realm of the subconscious. And as Primus sat alone in his office, staring into the shadows, he couldn't help but wonder if Zorak's nightmares were indeed a harbinger of something far more sinister lurking on the horizon. The next morning, a chime from his messaging device jolted Primus from a fitful sleep. He blinked groggily, his mind still foggy with the remnants of unsettling dreams. Glancing at the screen, his eyes widened as he read the urgent message from the university administration. A human exchange student named Kyle Walker had arrived on campus, and with him he had brought an unusual companion, a large muscular dog with a sleek black coat and piercing yellow eyes. The breed, a Doberman Pinscher, was unfamiliar to Primus, but the administration's description of the animal sent a chill down his spine. Kyle had requested permission to keep the dog, named Vader, in his dormitory room. The administration, unsure how to proceed, had turned to Primus for guidance, given his recent research into human-animal relationships. Primus sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The timing of Kyle's arrival, so soon after his unsettling lecture, and Zorak's disturbing nightmares seemed too coincidental to ignore. He knew he had to meet with Kyle and assess the situation personally. With a sense of trepidation, Primus made his way to Kyle's dormitory room. As he approached the door, he heard a low, menacing growl from within. Steeling himself, he knocked firmly. The door swung open, revealing Kyle, a tall, broad-shouldered human with a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Professor Primus, I presume?" he said, extending a hand in greeting. Primus nodded, stepping cautiously into the room. His gaze was immediately drawn to the imposing figure of Vader, who sat obediently at Kyle's feet. The dog's muscles rippled beneath his glossy black coat, and his yellow eyes seemed to bore into Primus's soul. "I understand you have some concerns about Vader," Kyle said, his tone light but with an undercurrent of tension. "I assure you, he's perfectly well trained and poses no threat to anyone on campus." Primus studied the human's face, noting the glint of something unsettling in his eyes. "I'm sure you understand my hesitation, given the unique nature of your pet," he said carefully. Kyle's smile widened, but there was a coldness to it that made Primus's skin crawl. "Vader is more than just a pet," he said, his voice low and intense. "He's my loyal protector, my constant companion. We share a bond that goes beyond mere ownership." To demonstrate his point, Kyle issued a series of sharp commands to Vader. The dog responded instantly, leaping to his feet and executing a complex series of maneuvers with lightning speed and precision. Primus watched, equal parts impressed and unnerved by the animal's discipline and obedience. As the demonstration concluded, Primus couldn't shake the growing sense of unease that settled in the pit of his stomach. There was something dangerous lurking beneath the surface of Kyle and Vader's bond, something that set his instincts on high alert. Despite his misgivings, Primus knew he had no solid grounds to deny Kyle's request. With a heavy heart, he reluctantly agreed to allow Vader to remain on campus, but silently vowed to keep a close eye on the pair. As he left Kyle's room, Primus couldn't help but feel that he had just made a grave mistake. His instincts screamed that trouble was on the horizon, and that Kyle and Vader's presence on campus would only bring darkness and danger in their wake. In the days following Kyle's arrival on campus, an eerie atmosphere descended upon the university. Whispers began to circulate among the students, tales of a large black dog stalking the grounds at night, its piercing yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. Some claimed to have heard the sound of low, menacing growls echoing through the halls, sending chills down their spines. Primus, his unease growing with each passing day, decided it was time to confront Kyle about the disturbing reports. He made his way to Kyle's dormitory, his heart pounding with a sense of foreboding. As he approached the door, he noticed it was slightly ajar, an unsettling silence emanating from within. Pushing the door open with a cautious hand, Primus stepped into the room, only to be greeted by a scene of utter chaos. Furniture lay overturned, deep scratch marks gouged into the walls as if some wild beast had torn through the space in a frenzy. In the center of the room, Kyle sat on the floor, his head buried in his hands, his body trembling with a mix of fear and exhaustion. Vader paced back and forth, his hackles raised and teeth bared, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The dog's muscles rippled beneath his sleek black coat, a predator ready to strike at any moment. Primus approached Kyle cautiously, his voice soft but firm. "Kyle, we need to talk about Vader. The students are frightened, and I fear for their safety." Primus listened intently as Kyle continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I've been trying to control him, but his behavior, it's getting worse, more aggressive. I'm afraid he might hurt someone, or even me." The professor's heart sank as he realized the gravity of the situation. He knew he had to act quickly to ensure the safety of the campus community. With a heavy heart, he contacted the university administration, requesting that Vader be removed from the premises immediately. As the authorities arrived to take the dog into custody, Vader's aggression reached a terrifying crescendo. The dog lunged at one of the officers, his powerful jaws snapping mere inches from the man's face. In a moment of desperation, Kyle threw himself between Vader and the officer, his arm raised in a futile attempt to protect the man. Vader's teeth sank into Kyle's flesh, tearing a deep gash in his arm. Blood poured from the wound as Kyle cried out in pain, his screams mixing with the dog's frenzied barks. The officers, seizing the opportunity, managed to subdue Vader, securing him with heavy chains and a muzzle. As Kyle was rushed to the medical bay, his injured arm cradled against his chest, Primus watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of dread. He couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was merely the prelude to something far more sinister, a darkness that threatened to engulf the entire campus. With Vader finally in custody, Primus knew he had to delve deeper into the mystery surrounding Kyle and his dog. He feared that the nightmares plaguing his students were not mere coincidence, but rather a warning of the horrors yet to come. As he turned to leave the scene, a cold shiver ran down his spine, a grim reminder of the... In the chaotic aftermath of Vader's attack, the university administration moved swiftly to implement sweeping new policies. Dean Zorgon, his face grim, addressed the faculty. "Effective immediately, all pets are banned from campus, no exceptions, and all human students will undergo mandatory psychological evaluations." Across campus, enforcement teams swept through dorms, confiscating animals amid protests. In the medical bay, Kyle sat hunched on an exam table, his bandaged arm throbbing, as a doctor explained he'd need to return to Earth for full treatment. Professor Primus retreated to his office, haunted. Replaying every moment with Vader and Kyle, he cursed himself for not acting sooner. Suspicion and paranoia crept into his thoughts. He eyed human students with unease, fearing the dark impulses that might lurk within them. His lectures grew erratic, his voice tinged with barely restrained terror. Students shifted uncomfortably as Primus ranted about the dangers humans posed, their twisted fascination with deadly beasts. Many stopped attending, disturbed by his unhinged diatribes. As months passed and the campus tried to heal, whispers of something unnatural spread. A shadowy presence stalked the grounds at night, a spectral black hound with blazing yellow eyes. Sightings trickled in, a glimpse phasing through a wall, a flicker in the corner of an eye. Then came reports of attacks. Students woke screaming, deep scratches scoring their flesh, bite marks oozing blood. Panic took root as the encounters grew, each more violent than the last. Patrols found nothing, no trace of this phantom hound, but the fear only swelled. Primus grew convinced this ghost was Vader, a malevolent shade born from the darkness Kyle had brought. He pored over arcane texts, seeking a way to banish the spectre. Obsession consumed him, his appearance turned gaunt and haggard, eyes wild. Late one night, pacing his office, Primus froze. In the doorway, eyes smouldering with otherworldly hatred, stood the translucent form of Vader. The spectral hound lunged, insubstantial jaws closing on Primus's throat. Searing pain, then darkness. The next morning, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the halls. Students crowded in the doorway of Primus's office, staring in horror at the scene within. The professor lay dead in a pool of blood, his face frozen in a rictus of terror. Deep gouges scored the walls, the bloody trails of fingers clawing desperately for salvation. From that grim day onward, a pall fell over the university. Though the sightings slowly faded, the legend of the spectral hound took root, a chilling testament to the horrors unleashed by Primus's fateful lecture. Mistrust and fear wormed into every heart, the once vibrant campus now a mere husk haunted by the ghosts of its own hubris. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.